Welcome to Teachers Transition Podcast, a show dedicated to supporting teachers transition in, through, and out of education. Grab your seat and let's talk about how to make your next transition a successful one. Okay, happy Sunday, everyone. My name is Alex Kirton, and welcome to another exciting episode of Teachers Transition Podcast. And today I have a very special guest. Her name is Erin Mote, and I'm so happy to learn more about her story. I had a great opportunity to meet her in Chicago at the Council of City Greater Schools at the CIO conference. And Erin, can you tell us about yourself, your family, who you are?
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you. And that was a very warm day that we met in Chicago, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I had hoped for something a little bit cooler because I live in Arizona.
Oh, wow.
So whenever I travel, May, June, and July, I'm always hoping to travel for cooler weather. But
Sure.
I'm Erin Mote. I'm the CEO of Innovate EDU. I am an educator, a mother, an activist, an advocate, a technologist, so many different roles. I have two kids because I think my most important role is mom to Robert and Claire. So my kids are 10 and 7. And certainly for anyone who's a teacher and has children or has children in their lives, maybe they're an aunt, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa, you know that being a parent in the education system is both a unique privilege and sometimes a challenge.
Yes.
And so, I think the work that I do at Innovate EDU in education is really focused on the intersection of technology, policy, data, practice. And so within Innovate EDU, I have an incredibly talented team. Many are former educators who left the classroom to come lead projects at Innovate EDU, whether that's Educating All Learners Alliance, which is an alliance that focuses on students with disabilities, or our most recent hire who just left the classroom and a district role to come join us to lead the EdSafe AI Alliance policy lab work with states and districts across the country. And so my role at Innovate EDU is really focused on education policy. Okay. So the vast majority of my day is spent supporting my incredible team and working on policy at the local, state, and federal level. So awesome. It's been a busy couple months for me at Innovate EDU and our team.
Yes, I remember when I met you, you were trying to catch a flight to DC. You were traveling, and I sent you a message, and you were like, I'll be off the grid for a few weeks. I'm going here and there. So yeah, definitely exciting to talk to. Now, people, they look you up, they see you now. Can you take us back to your earlier days, when Erin, the teacher, Erin, the parent, what was that? Give us a sense.
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't start my career in K-12 education. I started my career actually in higher ed. I worked at Arizona State University, and I was the director of external and strategic relations for the university. And that job is not as glamorous as it sounds. I had to work on all the special projects that other folks sort of didn't want to take on, or kind of were like across many things. So I got to do some really exciting things, like help found the School of Global Studies there, help lead work on the first presidential debate that came west of the Mississippi. I helped plan and execute. I got to do an incredible amount of work in higher education for a visionary leader, Michael Crow, who's still there. But I was at ASU when he first started, year zero, year one, working alongside the university to really think and dream up big initiatives. And then from there, I actually started my policy career. So I left Arizona State and I moved to DC, Maryland area, and I did a ton of work in national security. So for more than a decade. And I did work in technology and national security. So even more niche. So we're in the way back machine of around 2004. So you can imagine what that was like.
Sure.
And I got to have 10 plus years in government work and working alongside the US government in all over the world. I'm really focused on how to extend connectivity and technology to places around the world that were underconnected or not connected at all. So I was out of the country. I still had to be in the United States. I still was a US resident, so I still had a place in DC, but I was traveling about 300 plus days a year. And then I promise we're going to get to that very big pivot point when
Sure.
I came into K-12. I decided to leave national security and I got some great advice. Someone said you have to um, leave DC if you want to leave the national security field.
Well,
So I did. I moved to New York. I did a ton of corporate consulting. I was living in New York. I hated it. I had too much distance from impact. And it was really, I thought it was everything I wanted. I'm sure that some of your listeners have that experience where they see something that they think is the right role for them, they make that leap, and then it just doesn't feel right. And
yes.
that was certainly what happened for me. I thought that I wanted to do corporate consulting. I thought I wanted to do that work, and it just left me, frankly, like feeling soulless and drained. And so I told my now husband, he wasn't my husband at the time. So that's a story for another whole podcast. But, um, I told him that I was going to go back into NatSec, and on a street corner in Brooklyn, he said to me, "But wait, I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to, do have this like life with you that's not going to work if you're traveling 300 days a year." And he said, "What's the thing that like your was most inspiring for you?" And I told him of some work I had done tangentially in education
Okay.
in DC, and he looked at me and he said, we could start a school."
Wow.
And I said, "Are you crazy?" I might have said some other things that are not
Well,
appropriate for this podcast. And then it stuck with us. And we were going on a kind of holiday break for Thanksgiving. And we stayed up one night and drew the concept of the school we founded together, Brooklyn Lab Charter Schools, on a napkin.
oh, wow.
I still have that napkin. It
Okay.
has words like teachers like doctors, project-based learning, uh, opportunities for kids who don't have them. And so we built a school that we could walk to in our neighborhood that's still uh, today run by a great leadership team with actually folks who helped us found Brooklyn Lab, folks like Sean Harris, amazing middle school principal over there at Brooklyn Lab. But it was an incredible opportunity to found a school, become a teacher,
Yes.
um, lead middle school social studies and middle school science in those first couple of years, filling in, doing that work. And 10 plus years later, Brooklyn Lab has graduated, over 1,000 kids who are
Awesome.
now college going. And so it's a pretty incredible thing to have been a part of with an incredible team.
I mean, that's a lot of transitions that you went through. And we talk about, as teachers, all the time, like, going from Arizona State to federal government to meeting the love of your life to this idea of creating a school.
Yeah.
What are some lessons that you have taken? Because, I think all of us have these turning points or decisions where we have to pivot or take a leap. And, sometimes we get nervous or we don't know if this is the right decision. What are some of the things you can and help and inspire our listeners to take from your experiences? Because I'm sure there was no handbook to say, okay, you do this and this, and then boom, this you'll be successful. Then, so any
Yeah.
insights you could provide for us in your journey?
Yeah. I mean, you know, first, like life is not a linear path. And I think sometimes when we're younger, we imagine that life is this sort of linear path that I'm going to decide what I want to do and then I'm going to be able to sort of get there. And the reality is like nothing about my career, was linear.
Yes.
I think one of the things to think about is how do you understand what your currency is? So for me, I talk about that time when I did corporate consulting after being in the public sector. I thought wanted to make money and I thought I wanted to be in boardrooms and that type of thing. And that's not my currency. My currency is impact. The thing that really activates me is impact. And so when I had too much distance from impact, that was really, really hard on me personally. I was miserable. And all the signs in society would say I was successful, I was making more money, but I was miserable. And pay attention to that. Pay attention and understand what your currency is. And it's no judgment if your currency is cash, or if it's titles or things like that. That's just not what it is for me. And so, for your listeners trying to figure out what that is, I've always had a really great set of relationships and people. And I think the thing that marks my career in every chapter is great mentors, people who I'm still in touch with today, and great networks of people who have sustained me, groups, people that I could go to and ask for advice, and people in my network who have been critical friends and have said to me, that doesn't sound like you,
Yeah.
or that's not that doesn't sound like the thing that will make you happy. And then I think the other thing is vulnerability.
Yes.
I think vulnerability is my superpower. I'm authentic and I'm always vulnerable with people. I say when I'm really unsure. I talk about when I make mistakes. And so I think you have to check that fear, and realize that, like, be vulnerable, and that vulnerability often unlocks deeper and more caring relationships, people feeling like you are like your authentic self and then wanting to help you be a better version of your authentic self. And
Yes.
so I think a lot of surviving and navigating transitions for me have been people, a really good sense of self. And then when I was sort of losing my way, those people coming back and saying, "Is this who you are?" It's sort of like this, like, really interesting triangle. Um, but sometimes you take a leap and it doesn't work, and
Yeah.
you have to just pick yourself up and um, figure out why it didn't work
Mhm.
and get back up.
So are you saying it's okay that if you take a leap and you fall flat in your face, it's okay? Because I think, there's a misconception that, you know, you didn't do your homework or
Yeah,
you
no, I think like failure is actually the, like, other side of the coin of success. And I wouldn't be the leader I am. I wouldn't be the person I am without failing a lot in my life. And I think the difference in embracing failure is, do you learn from it?
yes.
And I think that's not just the big stuff, right? That's the little stuff. Are you able, when you make a mistake, to say I made a mistake,
Yeah.
to figure out and understand, how to do something differently? And so I tell my team all the time, I fail, I make mistakes a million times a day.
Sure.
I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of mistakes, and I'm not afraid of failure. And I don't want other people to be, because frankly, like, every entrepreneur has failed.
Mhm.
Every single entrepreneur has failed or has missed the mark or made a bad decision. Even our most successful entrepreneurs that, like, we hold up in society, as long as you don't, in that failure or in that mistake, kind of lose your core values, your moral compass, you can pick yourself up and get back.
Awesome. And you mentioned about your core people, your community, your mentors. What advice would you say as far as how to build that? Because oftentimes people think, hey, if I could only meet Simon Sinek, if I could only meet this person that's well of reach, then how do you build your core of people that kind of act as the I don't know the elders or your sounding board, you know?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think you go to people for different things. I have a group of girlfriends who are senior leaders in our space, who are all moms, who like I go to, when I'm trying to make tough decisions about my kids, or because they have sort of a sphere of reference and like experiences that make it, create that space for me. And so I think you have to do it both personally and professionally. I often say my social capital is infinite. I all the time take random people on LinkedIn asking me for a half an hour of my time for kind of career advice or thing or anything like that, because I think it's really important that you do that. Especially, I'll be honest with you, I have a very special place in my heart for women and women in technology. As somebody who worked in NatSec and worked in technology, I was often the only woman in the room. People often thought I was there to take the notes and not lead the project. And so, we have a huge problem in the education space that our leadership is not representative of the folks who are in front of our classrooms, and whether that is gender or whether that's lived experience or whether that is reflective of the context in the community that folks are teaching in. We in the education space need to do a better job of not just attracting a diverse group of educators, but creating pathways, sponsorship, mentorship, and opportunities for folks to continue to grow in their career, or when they want to make that leap,
Yes.
feeling like they have somebody to help them who's going to give them that advice. So any of your listeners who are listening, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to give some time. Might take a little time to get on my calendar, but I promise I will make the time.
I mean, I
Um,
to you and I'm thankful for this opportunity because it's it's really taking that risk to say, hey, I think this is an opportunity for me to learn. There's something about this individual that can help expand understanding and also hopefully expand my perspective of what is out there because like you said in that space there's definitely not equality. There's definitely a lot of room for growth.
yeah.
And speaking of that, how with your platform and your influence, how are you paving that way, for teachers and other women, whether in teaching or other professions, to kind of jump into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say there's kind of like three things I think I do like personally and professionally. So one, I already mentioned one at Innovate EDU. We tend to hire former educators. I really and folks who are leaving the classroom or who have a desire to leave the classroom. I tend to look for folks who have the experience and the understanding of what it's like to be a member of a school community in the United States today, because I think very few people understand the
Yes.
pressure. If you haven't been there, you don't understand what's happening in America's schools, what's happening with America's youth. And certainly if you're trying to support and other districts or states, you need to have a good understanding of what it's like to be day to day in a classroom today
Yes.
in the United States. And it's very different. I think even from when I was teaching at Brooklyn Lab in 2014 and 2015, And so I really love the classroom experience coming into leadership at Innovate EDU. So making those pathways within my own organization,
Mm.
highlighting when those paths exist in other organizations, whether that's in tech or non-tech roles for educators. That is something else I think that I try to do a lot. I try to say the hard thing too, at big events. So you'll see me talk at ASU GSV. You'll see me talk at CGCS. You'll see me talk at big education sector events and non-education sector events like South by Southwest or TED, about the need to support women, particularly in technology. It's something I talk a lot about that, if you are building in particular an ed tech product and you don't have someone who's been a classroom teacher, male or female, on your team, uh, your product is probably not going to be successful.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing. And then I often host opportunities. So we run a bunch of fellowships at Innovate EDU. We have a global fellows program for women in AI, a global catalyst program in our EdSafe AI Alliance. Every one of our alliances has some type of development program for people. We have an emerging leaders program in Project Unicorn, which focuses on data interoperability and data leadership. And then
Yes.
I run and steward a community of practice myself, along with my team that's been running for 10 years of folks who are doing work in data in schools called Data Wiz that really came together through an email chain in 2014 with my friend Jin Suha, who's now over at the Learning Accelerator, being like, what would it look like if we just got us all together
Yeah.
in Brooklyn? And we did. And now that community 10 years later is doing incredible, incredible things. So I think it's incumbent of leaders to not kick down as they climb up. And I try to do that every single day.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's just take a step back. So you mentioned earlier about, you and your husband starting a charter school. What
Yeah.
was that path? Because, there are, incredible teachers and leaders that,
Yeah.
have that vision, but don't know where, so talk about that process. And I would love to now circle back to Innovate EDU because, so many
Yeah.
great things you just mentioned.
Yeah. So we started Innovate EDU and Brooklyn Lab at the same time, and I'll
Oh,
talk a little bit about that. We started Innovate EDU actually because we got some really great advice, that the types of innovations that could scale that we were doing at Brooklyn Lab, we're going to need a scaling agent that wasn't a school.
okay.
And so we created Innovate EDU as a means to really be looking outward in the true belief of a lab school that we weren't going to found a new charter network of 30 or 40 schools. That was never the vision. We were always going to be a small place-based group of schools in downtown Brooklyn, which was super interesting so many things about founding a charter school. But again, this is really important in knowing what your currency is and knowing what your impact is. Eric and I were constantly under pressure to scale Brooklyn Lab to 50 campuses, in New York. And you have to remember this is, 2014, 2015, 2016, and scale, grow, was really the way that charter schools were sort of evolving. And I think we worked really hard to hold to creating a set of middle schools and a high school in one sort of area. Really, they were a block apart.
Okay.
So in downtown Brooklyn, and that was it. We weren't going to ever be 50 high schools or 50 middle schools or this massive charter network. That was really hard because we got a lot of downward pressure in the sector because Brooklyn Lab was so successful at moving the needle for kids. So Brooklyn Lab very early on, and through incredible educators and through what I think is a highly personalized model, and direct support from what we called Lab Core Fellows, but in today's language would be high dosage tutors, who every student got 2 hours of high dosage tutoring every single day.
Okay.
1 hour in math, 1 hour in literature or reading. So kids would enter at the sixth grade. People thought we were crazy to have a school that took any kid. And by the time I stepped away from the schools at year 6, 40% of our kids were students with disabilities.
I
People thought
want
we were crazy to do that
that.
too, and to take kids at sixth grade. Because frankly, we ended up taking kids that were not well served by other schools and institutions. And so, we would have young kids come in at sixth grade who we couldn't even score them
Mm,
on MAP, which is an assessment that helps you score for grade level, because they were reading below kindergarten, but they had matriculated all the way to the sixth grade. And getting kids back to grade level was really, really important. And so kids would enter with us. We didn't hit proficiency, um, maybe, for the grade as a whole in sixth grade, because we were just starting so far behind. But by eighth grade, if kids stuck with us, and many of our kids stuck with us all the way through high school. But if you stuck with us through eighth grade, we were hitting scores that were well above the state
wow.
proficiency, because it took us 3 years to get
Yeah.
kids to grade level, to give them that content, and frankly, to understand where the gaps were. Oftentimes we had such talented educators at Brooklyn Lab who would have a young person who was really struggling with something like fractions in the sixth grade, and they would uncover that it was really that young person, it wasn't just they weren't getting fractions, it's that they didn't get the number line in third grade, those prerequisite skills. So
Sure.
with that high dosage tutoring, they would work on those prerequisite skills, help a young person understand the difference on 3/1 and 1/3. And then all of a sudden we could unlock grade level content. And so that
Yes.
idea was really, really powerful. But founding a charter school was really hard. It was financially hard. We ended up taking out a lot of our own personal savings to initially kind of get the school off the ground. And, um, we I was relatively new to education. Eric had had a long and storied career in education, and so my learning curve was just bigger. And I often asked annoying questions like, "That's stupid. Why did they do it that way?" Um, which really were not lovely for our authorizer. Did not love those
Sure.
questions.
Sure.
And this is, I think, a little known fact about Brooklyn Lab, is that originally Eric, who is my husband now, who I founded the school with, we weren't married when we founded the school,
Okay.
um, but he had he was gonna lead Innovate EDU, and I was gonna lead the school. That was like how we originally
Interesting.
construed it. And
Gotcha.
then talk about like the failure point, the pivot point, knowing yourself well enough.
Sure.
We got our charter in January. By May, Eric and I decided that was not going to work, that I had too steep of a learning curve, had too big of a learning curve to lead the school to open in the fall, and that they needed Eric as an experienced school leader to step in and take over Brooklyn Lab, and I would take over Innovate EDU. So I
Okay.
think a little known part of our story is that actually in the beginning, our roles were reversed, because we're very much the same, that we wanted to challenge ourselves to grow. But
Sure.
I failed. I couldn't get there. And it took a great group of folks saying, those mentors, those folks, to say, I think this is too much, too fast. Um, and I think Eric should step in, and you should go to Innovate EDU. And so lo and behold, 10 plus years later, I'm leading Innovate EDU. Eric's leading a big project in the future of assessment. But, the original story of our founding is actually a story of failure,
Yeah.
and understanding, um, when you're in over your head, and you need support, and you need to figure that out. So just kind of going back a little bit to our original conversation, um, and being safe about when things don't really work out. That's a little bit about the beginning of of Brooklyn Lab. But if somebody wants to start a charter school, there's so many support programs now, which didn't exist in 2014.
Yes,
And
yes,
I would so recommend folks doing like a charter school accelerator or partnering with someone like New School Venture Fund or partnering with someone like Charter School Growth Fund who has like a accelerator type um, kind of mechanism for charter schools. And um, I think that that's a great way to be in cohort and get started. And one thing I love about 2014 versus now is like I think there's a real opportunity for us not to have this sort of like false divide between charter schools and
yes,
traditional district schools right now. I look at Chicago where we met and where there's some really interesting symbiotic things happening there. New York City, the small schools model. So I'm really excited for folks who are thinking about that. There's also lots of opportunities in things like micro schools
yes.
that are coming up as well and that have a group of accelerators. So, um, have a conversation with your partner or whoever else you have in your life because it will be 2 years of challenges and stress and all that, but take the leap.
I mean, that's great. I was actually my that's last week started a micro school, and he revealed that she was a former teacher, former administrator, and she kind of put a nose up to homeschooling, and and she actually homeschooled all of her kids, and
Yeah.
uh, I wanted to ask you, what made you guys decide not to scale?
Yeah.
'Cause, you know, obviously, I'm sure there's people say this is amazing. You just,
Yeah.
because those are also transitions where you're doing something well, and you got to know, like in business, am I going to make a franchise of this? Am I going to,
Yeah.
really focus on what I do well? So what were kind of those signs that helped you navigate through those other voices?
Yeah, I will say one thing about New York was real estate. Like it's so hard to find space. We ended up being in three buildings for Brooklyn Lab for our two middle school and our high schools. And the 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 I never thought we would become like commercial real estate developers, but we did. We ended up having to develop commercial real estate. And so I think there was a real set of constraints around space in 2014, 15, 16, and 17 that um we knew it would be a ton of work to scale. But the real answer, that's the answer we gave our funders. The real answer is something more authentic, which was we believed that we needed to scale the practices at Brooklyn Lab rather than the schools. And so that's where Innovate EDU really kicked into high gear in I would say like 2015, 16, 17, started doing communities of practice, started licensing the software we had developed for Brooklyn Lab,
Okay.
started the very beginnings of the alliance work with Project Unicorn. Um, and so we made the decision that we were going to work hard to use Innovate EDU to scale the practices and to scale movements that we were pioneering at Brooklyn Lab around personalized learning, around project-based learning, around high dosage tutoring.
Yes.
Now that I think are commonplace and best practice around residencies and apprenticeships,
Mhm.
like our LabCorp members who did that high dosage tutoring were paid members of the staff, and they then had the opportunity to do a 2-year um, apprenticeship at Brooklyn Lab once they completed 1 year of LabCorp. That's a model now at Innovate EDU. We have a 80 plus organization alliance around the Pathways Alliance, and we work with the Department of Labor to scale, and we've scaled to
Wow.
48 states, right? So it was the right move to do practices, not like physical plant. I think the other really authentic answer is, Eric and I um, felt like we would lose the thing that made labs special, which was a school in our own neighborhood with kids who came from a really diverse cross section
Yes.
of Brooklyn
Yeah.
who were really committed to moving the needle for kids who are in the juvenile justice system,
Okay.
students with disabilities, and I think we just knew that if we could show people that it was possible from other charter schools, from other countries, from traditional district schools. We created mentorship programs with New York City public schools. Eric formed a deep relationship with the AFT, which everybody was like, that's so weird. That's a charter school.
Hmm.
um, you know, and so we really focused on practices because we believed that the things that people could see could be replicated in every school in this country, a sliver of those practices. So I think the last couple years I was at Brooklyn Lab at Innovate EDU, but still like working place-based with Brooklyn Lab, our offices were co-located. There were years where we were doing school tours literally every single day
Wow.
of the year. And it was all because this commitment to like people need to see it,
Yes.
to be able to imagine that happening in their own district. So we had like shadow principal programs with New York
Okay.
City. And that's the decision we made. It was really hard. It was not a popular decision with some of our funders. It was
Okay.
not a popular decision in the sector. And we took a lot of, I remember taking some amount of heat from other charter school founders in New York. Um, but but we stayed tight to our convictions, to our beliefs. And I think it's why Brooklyn Lab continues to thrive today. And I think it's why when I think about the impact, it's not, those 1,000+ kids who have graduated from college who've matriculated through Brooklyn Lab, but it really is. I see those practices in our alliances today at Innovate EDU in states and schools and districts across the country.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Um,
But not easy.
yeah. Yeah. Well, talk about that because people just, they see where you are, say, oh, you know, she must have knew somebody. She did this right. And people don't understand the path is hard, you
It's
know?
really hard. I mean, I will say there were years there where, we were newly married, new family. Robert's 10, so just go back. He was born that first year at Brooklyn Lab, so I had a baby
Wow.
March of our first year.
Okay.
And then when we founded our high school, I actually had my daughter, so it was on
Wow.
trend. Found a school, have a kid. Maybe that's why we never did another one. But maybe that's actually the deep secret. But I think
Third
it's not
child.
easy. Right. No third child. You're right. The school was our third child. It was our
Yes.
first child, actually.
Exactly.
Don't tell my kids that. But it's not easy. People don't talk about the hard moments, the moments of doubt, the moments where you feel really out of your depth. Um, and then there's just real moments of struggle, among my hardest moments of an educator, um, has have been when we have lost students at Brooklyn Lab.
Yes.
And I remember them more than I remember some of our graduates in some ways because they
Yes.
stick with me in particular. And no one prepares you for how much you're going to love those kids, how much you're going to feel the pain
Yes.
when you lose them, or when they choose a path that changes their life trajectory, not for the better. And we spend a lot of time, I think, as educators talking about the trajectory of kids who made it to the Foreign Service or
Yes.
doctors. Those are some of my kids right now, but um, I remember the Kayvons and the Malikas and
Yes.
some of those kids even more. And so it's not easy.
Yeah.
And yeah,
being in education for over 25 years, I've had some students, make it to American Idol, and we had one student in our district get an opportunity to go on the moon, which is incredible,
yeah,
but then you remember those students, I spent a good most of my career with the privilege of working with special education, students, and for some of them, it was just, for them to sing on pitch took them 3 or 4 years. Whether another student would took a few months, just kind of seeing those milestones,
yeah,
and of course the ones we've lost, or through tragedy, or so that's the it's so precious, that the responsibility we have to make an impact, you know. And as far as your impact, I know that there are teachers that are waiting. Okay, how do I how do I get an opportunity to work for Erin, or someone that's like Erin? What are opportunities? Because there's always, teachers. Unfortunately, because your work, you know the landscape. I watch your articles on LinkedIn, kind of sensing the temperature of education and policy. What are some things you can tell the teachers that are, of course, you have some teachers that are kind of burned out, which is
yeah,
hard to transition, because you don't always make the right decisions, because you think anything else is better.
yeah,
And then, of course, those teachers that are, that have spent a lot of time in education, they feel like they can do more. So, what are some things? And I'm sure teachers are like, yes, she's hiring other teachers. Like, where are more, CEOs, and where there are other companies? Because unfortunately, teachers, the society doesn't see us as, we do so many skills, but
yeah.
teachers. So, insights as far as teachers that are transitioning. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the reasons I love hiring folks in the classroom isn't just because they have context. It's because, like, at Innovate EDU, we run hard and we run fast, and you have to pivot and multitask. And I think sometimes as educators, maybe you're not using the right language for what you are doing in your role. It's not that you are teaching a classroom of 30 kids. You're teaching, right? You're managing, you're leading, you're working in a multifunctional team. You're doing that work that really are the skills that employers are looking for. And so using, I think, the language, and this is increasingly important, frankly, in the age of AI, where the vast majority of employers, not at Innovate EDU, but the vast majority of employers are using AI to screen resumes. And so you have to, think about what you've been doing in the classroom, and what you've been doing, and think about the types of durable skills that employers are looking for, and frankly, they're screening for. So if you're somebody who, and every teacher does this, I think, uses data to inform decision making. Make sure that, in that first paragraph on your resume, you're saying, like, data driven decision maker, data informed. Like, think about the sets of skills that you've built. That's one thing. So it's sort of how you market yourself, and how you market yourself for a job maybe outside of education, if that's your choice.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of translating the experience you're having in the classroom into the types of skills, competencies, and dispositions that are in that job description. The second thing I think is, I watch this happen all the time with educators, is that, like, if they don't have 10 of 10 of the skills that are listed on the job, they won't apply for the job. Don't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Like, if you have 6 of 10, go for it. Like, you should go for it if it's something that you're passionate about. Always try to network to a role. If you know you want to leave the classroom, start doing informational interviews
Okay.
in companies or in sectors or with people who will get to know you, and will get to who will have a reference conversation with you. And then when you apply, or you reach out to them, either if you're applying for a role at their company or something that's tangential, they will make a recommendation. I do this all the time for my fellows, in EdSafe or in the emerging leaders cohort. I always, if they're applying for a role and they reach out to me and say, I've applied for this role, I'm always happy to make that call, especially now in the age of AI, so that their resume can be looked at by a human, not just by AI. I do that all the time. And so ask people to do that for you. So many times we're like scared to ask somebody to speak up on our behalf or to do that. Just do that. The other thing I think I see, and this is a mistake I see folks make in education and outside education, and it happens all the time, where people will put down folks for references and then they won't talk to the person about the job they're applying for.
Okay.
Do that.
Yes.
Like, you need to talk to the person who is going to be called about the job that you are applying for, because, it is so important. Oftentimes at Innovate EDU, we're down to 2 or 3 great candidates at the end. And our team, is there's never there's not never, but it's very often that we're between 2 people. And the thing that decides for us is when we talk to people who have worked with that person in the past, is those reference checks. I will tell you, it is remarkable to me when people have not picked up the phone, send a text and say, I'm applying for this role. Here's the job description. Can you speak to this? Can you speak to that? This is what I talked about in my final interview. If you want a job, you got to work for it.
And also the person that's the reference needs to know the context so they can speak to that.
Absolutely. It's like fascinating to me that this is like something that that folks kind of don't do. And so, like tips and tricks of how to make that leap. It is about networks. It is about people. It is about connections, but it's also about asking for what you need.
Yes.
And when you ask someone for what you need to be a reference, make sure that they're prepped to be able to do the thing that you need, which is advocate on your behalf. And so, you have to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
And you have to empower others to advocate for you. I say this to my team all the time. I say this to my children all the time. It's really great advice that I got very early on in my career, maybe delivered a little bit more harshly than I just delivered it. But, I had a boss who very early on in my carear, I'm not going to tell you who she is. She's a pretty famous woman. Who, after my first meeting where I was on her staff, I was very junior in my career. She pulled me aside and she said, no one's going to make time for you to speak at the table. If you have something to say, you have to say it.
Wow. Okay.
And she was hard and I cried.
Okay.
To be honest. But, I love that woman. She and we still have dinner 3 times a year. She's among the best bosses I've ever had. We couldn't have had deeper ideological or policy differences. But she said what I needed to hear in that moment. And when I hesitate to speak up, I hear her voice.
You hear her voice. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm realizing as the more I do this podcast, the audience intent was teachers, but I'm learning more that parents are being impacted by this. My own 70-year-old mother, who'll be 70 tomorrow, she kind of gives me a little
happy birthday to her.
She gives me a little synopsis about the lessons that she learned. So I want to broaden this last question to speaking to fellow, CEOs.
Yeah.
What I've come across from hearing you is you're very mission focused, and it helped drive a lot of the things you do. And I was hoping you can kind of give us some final, encouragement as a leader, because you're running a company, you're traveling, and what words of encouragement can you speak to those leaders that are out there that are trying to break those glass ceilings, that are trying to get into technology? Because education is great for technology. Just got to find where to get in. So if you can speak from that CEO hat to other CEOs to encourage them as we close on this podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks for that invitation. Again, happy birthday, Mom. I hope you have a wonderful birthday. I think that no leader is perfect. Leadership is a journey, and I'm constantly learning. And I think one of the things that I want to say to other leaders is something I've frankly already talked about a little bit in this podcast is you have to be vulnerable as leaders. If we're going to grow the next generation of great leaders in education or in tech, it's incumbent upon CEOs to stop pretending it's all perfect, to stop pretending you know it all, because you don't. I don't. And to really sort of, one, narrate your why and figure out your why, but two, really mentor, sponsor, and create pathways for folks to develop their own leadership capacity who are significantly, probably younger than you are, and not see that as a threat. When one of my team members succeeds, is quoted in an article, has a speaking engagement, I am among the people who is cheering the loudest, yelling the loudest. And I want other leaders in our space and beyond our space to be really thinking about that and doing that. It's that, are you climbing the ladder and kicking it as you go up, or are you actually reaching a hand down? And I think that is really important if we are to continue to be a sector that has impact, that has a next generation of leadership who frankly does better than I do, and better than you do, and better than our current set of leaders. That's what we need. We need folks who also ask us hard questions. I'm working on a writing piece right now about how much my thought paradigm has changed, and deconstruction and reconstruction, and just even having the ability to stop, to pause, and to reflect, and then to say when you made a mistake, when you've changed your mind, when your thoughts are evolving. I think if we were more generous in our vulnerability as leaders in this space, we would be accelerating change a whole lot faster.
Wow. Well, Erin, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom.
Thank you.
And I know, as I say to all my guests, your experiences are going to help encourage and help inspire people to push farther than they are currently in. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And take the leap, listeners. Just do it. Thank you. Be well.
And thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with a colleague. Keep learning, keep growing, and never stop believing in your impact, because you truly make a difference.